It needs more money and still has not seen one patient. Why the city of Denver is being asked to spend more at the state's empty field hospital. When a victim of violence arrives at the hospital, they expect their injuries to be healed. A new program in Aurora is hoping to treat the wounds you can't see. Truth tests are supposed to clear up confusion, but a statement I made last week might have added to it, especially when you compare what I said to a new ad. And a different type of political campaign sign is popping up in a Denver neighborhood in need of its next name. Too soon. You often hear too soon after a traumatic event. It's too soon to talk about why it happened. It's too soon to talk about how to fix it. It's not too soon for the outreach workers at hospitals who are talking to victims of violence, young victims, a method the city of Aurora will soon adopt. Our Mark Salinger started this story prior to COVID-19, which is why you're going to see some people without masks.
Lying in a hospital bed, the conversation starts with a question.
The first thing I do is say, how are you doing? How are you feeling right now?
It's Johnny Williams' job to change lives. Much of his work comes just hours after teenagers and people in their 20s have become victims of violent crime.
Just talking to them and helping them through that. And then after that, talk to them about what can we do to prevent this from happening to you again.
Williams is the executive director of the DAN Rescue and Support Project and an outreach worker for a hospital-based violence intervention program at Denver Health. The goal is to break the cycle of violent crime by meeting with people while they're still in the hospital.
It catches them in a moment where they're alert to what decisions they're making in their life. They're processing in that moment, like, what could I have done differently so that I didn't end up here?
In 2019, the team of 6 outreach workers met with 496 people at Denver Health impacted by violent crime. They say the program is working, so much so the city of Aurora recently approved funding to start its own at-risk intervention and mentoring program at University of Colorado Hospital. That's where trauma surgeons like Catherine Velopoulos
it works.
See hundreds of patients that could benefit every year.
We need to have programs that are actually able to help the whole person and intervene in people's lives as opposed to just putting Band-Aids on things, so to speak.
Data shows 20% of homicide victims are treated for a violent injury in the 5 years preceding their death.
It's a moment where they're reevaluating their life situation, and they can go one of 2 directions.
Dr. Katie Bates hopes they can use a hospital visit to get people help so they don't end up back in the emergency room again or worse.
I know that our program helps give them a lifeline.
And the program in Aurora will start on July 1st. As for the ages, the majority of people that they see are between the ages of 14 and 28, though, Marshall, some caseworkers say that they often see kids that are much younger.
Hey, Mark, has this program been impacted by COVID-19 with hospitals not allowing people to come in?
Yeah, it has. And like you just said, people weren't necessarily allowed to come into the hospitals as often as they were in normal times. But now it's starting to pick back up again. During the height of the pandemic, they also didn't see as many people, as many patients coming into those hospitals. Marshall.
Mark, I appreciate that story. And thanks for keeping it going for so long. I know you've been working on that for a few months. This back here is something I've always wanted to use as a prop. It's the piggy bank I got when I was a kid. I bring it up because there is a hospital downtown that is empty that needs more money from the piggy bank. Hopefully not this money. It's not going to get you very far. It's a hospital that's meant to be used in case we see another outbreak of COVID-19. Tomorrow, a Denver City Council committee will consider adding more money to fund food, laundry, IT services at the temporary field hospital at the Colorado Convention Center. If approved, it will mean the city has spent $1.4 million to cover hospital costs through September. The state will ultimately pay Denver back. I reached out to the State Joint Information Center about the need for new money. I was told I'd get more information tomorrow. The lease alone for the Colorado Convention Center is $60,000 a day. The Colorado Convention Center may be empty, but other temporary COVID-19 related facilities are being utilized. For instance, the National Western Complex is a place for homeless men. It housed 648 people recently. It can house as many as 760. There's also the Denver Coliseum, and that is a place for women who are experiencing homelessness to find shelter. 181 were there last night. We're told that can hold up to 300. Now, at the men's shelter at the National Western Complex, there was violence last week. A man was stabbed and killed. A 38-year-old is now charged with murder. He was also staying at the shelter. Homeless advocates tell us they rarely see violence like that at the normal city shelters. The city made it a goal a few months ago to acquire 3,000 hotel and motel rooms to be used by people experiencing homelessness. At the moment, they've reached a quarter of that goal. About 800, a little more than 800 units are currently being used. 442 of those are housed with people. We have access to 800. They serve two purposes, though. One, to house people who are experiencing homelessness that are suffering from COVID-19, and to give high-risk members of the state homeless population a place to stay and protect themselves.
I think we will need both types of motel and hotel spaces on a long-term basis, because as we continue through this pandemic, more people are probably going to contract the virus. And if they are not housed, they need a place to isolate and recover in. Hopefully, we won't have to increase needing more resources than we have online. But I think, we're learning every day how much things change as we respond to this pandemic. And if, we have a second wave, or if we're not quite through with our first wave, we may have to bring more of these resources online.
We asked whether there would be more rooms added to that list of 800 currently in the supply of the city. We're told that conversations continue with hotel and motel owners. Hospitalizations from COVID-19 in the state continue to trend down. 141 Coloradans are currently in a hospital with the disease. 14 have been discharged or transferred in the last 24 hours. And after a recent spike in daily tests processed by the state, that number took a big dip yesterday. 4,000 COVID-19 tests were processed on Monday after 6 straight days with more than 5,500. It's a sensitive topic, but it still needs to be fact-checked. There's a video circulating online from the sister of Elijah McClain, and he died after an encounter with Aurora police last summer. In that video, his sister claims that the three of the officers involved now work with the Denver Police Department. We checked with DPD, and they tell us that's just simply not true. McClain died last year after a struggle with officers. He was put in a carotid hold and given medication. He then went into cardiac arrest. The officers were cleared of wrongdoing, and an independent review of the case was launched earlier this year. But that's now back to square one after pushback from members of City Council earlier this month. The independent investigator was dropped over concerns he would not be unbiased. He's a former police officer and a lawyer who has previously defended police officers. We checked with the city of Aurora, and we still don't have a new investigator to look into that case. As we get closer to our first break, fair warning, there are 8 political ads in this broadcast today between now and 6:39, if you count what I'm about to show you next. In a truth test I did last week, I talked about how Republican Senator Cory Gardner was the 3rd most bipartisan senator. Well, there's a new ad that makes that claim seem kind of confusing.
Republicans know John Hickenlooper's the one who will beat Cory Gardner, who's voted 98% of the time with Donald Trump.
That's close. The number is debatable. And what does it mean anyway? The president doesn't vote, so how does a senator vote with him? DU political science professor Seth Maskett explains.
The White House will put out a memo saying the president recommends a yes vote or the president recommends a no vote on this bill, and he'll name that bill specifically. Rather than just, I think there should be this tax reform, or I think there should be gun reform, or anything like that. Okay, so back to the 98% number. This ad cites Congressional Quarterly for that statistic. We don't pay for Congressional Quarterly data, so let's look at 538.com, which also tracks similar information for free. Since the start of 2017, this website has tracked the president's support or opposition of specific bills and nominations. Compare that to how Gardner voted on those issues, and Gardner has a lifetime score of supporting the president 89% of the time. But in a truth test last week, I said this: Gardner is considered the 3rd most bipartisan senator in 2019. How can he be the 3rd most bipartisan and support the president 9 out of 10 times? The bipartisan ranking comes from the Lugar Center, which bases it mainly
mainly on bill sponsorship and co-sponsorship, not actual votes.
When he co-sponsors a Democrat's bill, he might be helping it a little bit. He might be showing it some support that it has across party lines that can help it pass. But also, if it fails, it doesn't really hurt him. It doesn't cost him very much to lose on that. If you actually look at how he votes on actual roll calls on the Senate floor, he looks much more conservative.
We're still getting messages from you worried about when Kyle is coming back from his furlough. Rest easy knowing that I borrowed our fancy Kyle tracker from Steve a whole 6 days before he's back again. We'll do our best to hold down the fort and come up with better graphics by then. It won't just be a politician's name that you'll see on yard signs. More than 130 names are up for consideration to replace Stapleton, and they're coming to a lawn near you.
I really want this to be centered around what do we see in the future for our children.
And some local entrepreneurs give the Green Book a modern update. Next. You might mistake them for political campaign signs, but they're not candidates running for office. Look closely at the yard signs and t-shirts. Mosley, a name we can stand by. They're part of a push to rename the Stapleton neighborhood after John and Edna Mosley, two civil rights activists from Denver. John was a Tuskegee Airman, and Edna was the first woman of color to be elected to Aurora City Council. Their grandchildren want to name the neighborhood after them and created a full campaign to get people to support that idea.
It's time that we're talking about civil rights and social justice and the dismantling of systemic oppression and racism. I think that symbols mean something, and that we need something to believe in right now, and we need to win. And I think
it's not going to be an easy campaign to win. There are more than 130 different name suggestions submitted to the Neighborhood Association. They're still working on how exactly they'll have the public decide which name to go with. Yesterday, we told you about the huge surge Denver police have seen in the amount of calls they're getting about illegal fireworks that somehow look like professional displays. 750 calls from June 15th to the 21st compared to only 69 that same week last year. A good majority of those calls came this past Sunday thanks to this impromptu display near Coors Field. It's not just people in Denver lighting them off. We heard back from Aurora Police today who say between June 14th and June 22nd, they received 515 calls. Last year, 29 during that same period.
A beautiful summer day, sunshine, our high at 87. We did see some 90s out west, and that heat is coming from the metro area both Wednesday and Thursday. Severe storms in New Mexico, but we're tracking thunderstorms coming off the foothills, moving from the northwest to the southeast. A lot of lightning, a lot of rain, and even some small hail. Tomorrow will be a drier day, a warmer day, as high pressure centers itself over the region ahead of a cool front that brings showers and cooler weather on Friday. Tonight, partly cloudy and 58 degrees. Tomorrow, we've got sunshine and we're back to 90. Dry weather for Wednesday and Thursday and a cooler day Friday. Our best shot at rain at the end of the week ahead of a nice weekend warming trend. Upper 80s and low 90s for Sunday and Monday.
Today, we have a dream of launching a rebirth of the original Green Book.
A reimagining of Victor Hugo Green's Green Book. And we don't mean the Oscar-winning film. Two Coloradans want to make life more inclusive. Next. In the 1930s, during segregation, Victor Hugo Green published Negro Motorist Green Book, a guide to help Black Americans find safe places to travel in America. Now, Crystal Egley and Parker McMullen Bushman, the co-founders of Inclusive Journeys, hope to help people who face discrimination with a fresh take on the Green Book.
The original Green Book was published between 1936 and 1967. It's essentially a map of safe havens for Black people who are trying to recreate and basically just live their everyday lives.
So here in Colorado, we've got Lincoln Hills. As a Black woman, I am never certain whenever I go into a place whether someone's bias, unconscious or conscious, is going to affect the way that they serve me.
It wasn't until I started hunting, and now I'm walking around with a firearm. Once I realized that these insecurities, these fears were stopping me from going where I wanted to provide food for my family, that is what made me realize I'm not going to live with this anymore. I am going to do something about this.
The project we're working on is a digital Green Book project. And so our goal is to create a safe space where people can go and list their experiences at organizations or businesses. But it's also a way, finally, for businesses to be able to have data that will allow them to say, in what ways are we being really welcoming, and in what ways do we maybe need to change?
This website is for people of all marginalized identities. There are Black people who can be part of the LGBTQ community. There's Black people with disabilities.
We hope to do for inclusivity what Yelp and other customer service apps like TripAdvisor has done for customer service.
We want to create a system that makes the world a better place for our children.
Crystal and Parker hope to have the digital Green Book online by next year. We'll have more about their project on a link to this story on the website, 9news.com. The most Colorado thing we saw today takes us to Summit County, bluegrass by the Blue River. Next. The most Colorado thing we saw today comes from our producer, Kevin Larson. A perfect backdrop for a concert. Live music has returned to downtown Breckenridge. Over the weekend, there was some bluegrass outside of the Riverwalk Center. You got the Blue River in the foreground, the mountains in the back, like a painting. The crowd was spaced out in groups, and most people were wearing masks. Kevin tells us the visitors seem to be doing a good job with following the health guidelines. Feedback tonight is about my appearance and the decorations. How many pairs of glasses do I have? I've got the tie clip, the ones I'm wearing, the ones behind me, another pair, 2 more that need new lenses, and I just donated 8 to the Lions Club of Colorado. Got another tweet. This Marshall from Twitter is banking on seeing more Marshall, but tomorrow you'll see Anusha as she takes the countdown over tomorrow next time.